Imagine walking into the most glamorous party of the year and in a single night losing your marriage, your reputation, and your entire identity. But what if the humiliation everyone saw was actually part of a plan so brilliant it would bring down billionaires, influencers, and an entire dynasty? This is not just another scandal. This is betrayal, revenge, and the ultimate twist no one saw coming. Stay with me until the end. You won't believe how this crazy wife story transforms into one of the most shocking takedowns of the elite ever told. And hey, if you love stories filled with power, secrets, and jaw-dropping twists, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, share it with a friend, and of course, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. Let's dive in. The Met Gala after party was in full swing, an air of opulence and exclusivity oozing from every corner of the lavish ballroom. Champagne flowed freely, and guests, clad in extravagant gowns and tuxedos, floated across the room as if they owned the world. Cameras flashed, capturing moments of grandeur and excess, while the social elite basked in their carefully cultivated perfection. Victoria Sterling, in her stunning $50,000 Valentino gown, was no exception. Every inch of her look screamed wealth, power, and elegance, from her perfectly curled hair to the sleek, diamond-encrusted clutch in her hand. She was the epitome of grace, and tonight she had planned to take the spotlight. This was her moment. She stood at the entrance, taking in the grandeur of the scene before her, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor as she made her way toward the circle of friends who were waiting for her by the bar. But as she moved forward, her eyes locked on a figure in the distance, and suddenly her entire world seemed to tilt. There, across the room, was Ashley Winters, the young Instagram influencer and fitness model who had been the talk of the town for the past few months. But it wasn't Ashley's presence that made Victoria's heart lurch. It was the fact that Ashley was wearing the exact same Valentino gown. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her like a freight train. The same dress, the same couture gown she had agonized over for weeks. The dress she had handpicked, knowing it would be the perfect statement for this high society event. The dress that was rightfully hers, bought with the Sterling family trust, which was, as of late, meant to be Victoria's inheritance after Marcus's father had passed away. Victoria's stomach churned as she watched Ashley glide confidently across the ballroom, her young, flawless figure seeming to radiate with a confidence that Victoria couldn't muster. Marcus, standing by Ashley's side, smirked as the photographer's cameras flashed incessantly. How could he, Victoria thought, her fists tightening around her clutch. How could he let her wear my dress? The flashbulbs went off in rapid succession as the cameras captured Ashley in all her glory, posing with her hands on her hips, a self-satisfied grin plastered on her face. Meanwhile, Victoria stood frozen in place, unable to move, feeling her self-assured facade crack beneath the weight of public humiliation. She tried to regain composure, to appear unaffected, but the damage was done. The room was buzzing with whispers, and eyes were shifting between her and Ashley as if they were silently comparing the two women. The heavy thud of her heart echoed in her ears as she realized that this was no accident. This was a deliberate slap in the face, a power move designed to show Victoria just how much control Marcus and Ashley had over her life, over her marriage. Victoria took a shallow breath and turned on her heel, making her way toward the corner where Sarah, her best friend and confidant, was waiting with a concerned look on her face. As she approached, Sarah's eyes scanned her face, clearly noticing the storm brewing in Victoria's eyes. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice low, her gaze flicking nervously between Victoria and the other woman across the room. Victoria forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "Of course, I'm fine." But her voice betrayed her, cracking at the end. Sarah didn't buy it. "Victoria, look at me," she said firmly, her hand resting gently on Victoria's arm. "We'll take care of this. We'll take care of Ashley." Victoria nodded, her lips tight, as her eyes darted toward Ashley one last time. She could feel the weight of the room on her shoulders, but Sarah's comforting presence gave her the small boost she needed. She wasn't alone, and she wouldn't let this humiliation define her. "We'll ice her out," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing in determination. I'll make sure the other wives know what she's doing, and I won't let her get away with this. Victoria took a slow, steadying breath. Thank you. She turned back toward the ballroom, the surge of adrenaline pushing her forward as she walked with newfound resolve. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that the social hierarchy of the elite would protect her, that the wives' circle, as toxic as it was, could shield her from the storm brewing at her feet. But beneath that fragile hope, there was a gnawing feeling in her gut that something much darker was about to unfold. As she moved deeper into the room, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation, she couldn't shake the thought of Marcus's smirk. She knew it wasn't just Ashley who had plotted this humiliation. It was Marcus, and he was enjoying every second of it. The evening's festivities continued, but for Victoria it was as if time had slowed. Her every move felt calculated, each breath a conscious effort to maintain the composure that she had once so effortlessly exuded. She pushed her way through the crowd, past tables covered in gleaming crystal glasses and flowers, every corner of the room seemingly mocking her with its perfection. She finally reached the bar where the wives' circle had gathered, and Sarah was already in the thick of it. The women, all dressed in the latest high-fashion trends, murmured amongst themselves as Sarah pointedly included them in the conversation. They all gave Victoria sympathetic glances, their eyes flicking back toward Ashley every few moments. Victoria tried to keep the smile on her face, but the warmth in her chest felt false, like a mask she had to wear. She was playing the game, yes, but it was a game she hadn't prepared for. The next few minutes passed in a blur. She moved through this crowd, her eyes darting toward the various people around her, trying to ignore the sting of their whispers, the unspoken judgment. But then, the unexpected happened. A loud burst of static from the AV system rattled her thoughts, followed by an announcement that made her freeze in place. "Attention, ladies and gentlemen," the voice of the event coordinator rang through the room. "We seem to have a small technical issue. Please bear with us for a moment." Victoria's pulse quickened. It wasn't just a technical issue. She recognized the faint hum of her therapist's voice coming through the speakers, unmistakable in its tone. It was her voice. Her heart skipped a beat. The moment was surreal, the room suddenly feeling as if it were suffocating her. No, she could hear her own voice, sobbing, pleading, raw. The words were unmistakable, the emotion behind them gut-wrenching. She had been in therapy for years, struggling with infertility, a hidden Xanax dependency, and the overwhelming fear that Marcus would replace her with someone younger, someone more beautiful. But then the words started to change. They were distorted, twisted. What had been a private, vulnerable moment had now been altered, manipulated. She could hear the edited audio, the word deranged echoing through the venue as the crowd turned to look at her, their phones already out, recording every second. Who did this? Her mind screamed, but her body was frozen, unable to move. Her worst nightmare had just become her reality. The room, once full of laughter and glamour, now felt like a prison. And at the center of it all stood Marcus, looking at her with a cold smirk. He knew. He knew exactly what had just happened, and he didn't care. The ballroom had gone silent after the distorted audio of Victoria's therapy session. The laughter, the music, the clinking of champagne glasses, all gone, replaced by an eerie stillness, like the breathless pause before a storm tears through a city. Every phone in the room was pointed at her, recording, feeding the scandal into the hungry void of social media. Victoria stood frozen, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for a shred of sympathy. Instead, she saw amusement, curiosity, judgment. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but her throat closed like a vice. And then came the sound of a microphone being tapped. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diane Sterling's sharp voice cut through the tension. Victoria's head whipped toward the stage. Her mother-in-law, Marcus's mother, stood there elegant in a black velvet gown with pearls glistening against her pale skin. Her posture was rigid, her expression somber, but there was a spark in her eyes that chilled Victoria's blood. "I feel it is my duty," Diane began, her voice carrying the weight of authority only old money could grant, "to address what we have all just heard. As Marcus's mother and as someone who cares deeply for the Sterling family legacy, I must admit, she paused, letting the silence swell, letting the crowd lean in. I am concerned for Victoria's mental health. The words landed like a dagger. Victoria staggered back, her heels scraping against the marble floor. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't you dare. But Diane was already gesturing. An assistant in a tuxedo strode across the stage carrying a stack of papers. He handed them to her with the solemnity of a priest delivering sacred texts. Diane adjusted her glasses and lifted the pages. These are medical records, Diane announced, documents that show a disturbing pattern, antidepressant prescriptions, years of therapy, psychiatric interventions, and miscarriages, multiple miscarriages. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria's knees buckled. No, she cried out, her voice cracking. That's private. You have no right. But Diane ignored her, continuing in a steady, almost clinical tone. And tragically, we see echoes of generational illness, records indicating that Victoria's own mother attempted suicide on more than one occasion. A troubling family history. The words were like poison dripping into the crowd. People shook their heads. Some whispered prayers. Others raised their phones higher, capturing the moment of Victoria's public dissection. Victoria rushed forward, her hands trembling, her eyes wild. Stop it! Those are lies! You hacked! Marcus hacked! She stopped herself. The words felt useless. She looked out at the sea of faces, searching for someone, anyone, who believed her. But all she saw was pity, worse than pity, contempt disguised as concern. Marcus stepped forward, slipping one hand into his pocket, the picture of a concerned husband. Mother, perhaps this isn't the time, but Diane cut him off. It is the time, Marcus. This family cannot ignore what is happening any longer. She turned her gaze to the crowd, her voice swelling with righteous indignation. Victoria is clearly unstable. For her own good and for the good of those around her, we must acknowledge the truth. Victoria clutched her head, her diamond earrings catching the light as she shook in disbelief. She could feel the room closing in, the walls pressing against her lungs. Her most intimate pain, her miscarriages, her mother's suicide attempts, her battles with antidepressants, laid bare in front of New York's elite. She tried to steady herself. You think this proves something? You think this makes me weak? Her voice rose, cracking under the strain. I'm not ashamed of needing help. Do you hear me? I'm not ashamed. But her defiance only made her look unhinged to the crowd, exactly as Marcus had planned. Phones captured every second, eager to upload the crazy wife's meltdown before the night was over. Diane shook her head slowly as if mourning. My dear, denial is part of the illness. The words crushed Victoria's last line of defense. She spun toward Marcus, tears streaking down her cheeks, mascara bleeding into the corners of her eyes. You did this to me. You broke into my files. You let her... Marcus's face was calm, infuriatingly calm, as he reached for her arm in a gesture that looked to the crowd like compassion. Victoria, please, he said softly, but just loud enough for the microphones to catch. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing herself. The phrase echoed in her skull, bouncing against the fractured walls of her dignity. The crowd murmured. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were commentary. Poor thing. She's losing it. I always knew she wasn't right. Her chest heaved. Her body shook. The humiliation was suffocating. And then, as if to twist the knife further, Diane leaned into the microphone again. Of course, she said, we will stand by her. We will pray for her, but until she seeks the treatment she desperately needs, we cannot allow her instability to endanger this family. The ballroom erupted in applause. Applause for Diane, for Marcus, for Ashley, who sat at a table across the room, her lips curled into a smirk as she laid a protective hand on her flat stomach, feeding into her role as the innocent bystander. Victoria's body went numb. Her own medical records, her pain, her scars, her private battles, weaponized against her in the cruelest way imaginable. Her knees gave way, and she stumbled to the floor, the hem of her Valentino gown pooling around her like spilled wine. Cameras flashed furiously, capturing the once regal wife brought to her knees. Sarah rushed to her side, crouching down, whispering frantically, "Don't let them see you break, Vic. Don't give them this." But it was too late. The world had already seen. Victoria pressed her palms against the cold marble, her breath ragged, her mind spinning. For years, she had believed that dignity could shield her, that appearances could protect her. But now, stripped bare in front of the entire elite, she realized the truth. Marcus didn't just want to humiliate her. He wanted to annihilate her. Her gaze lifted, blurry with tears, to where Marcus stood at the center of the room, one arm around his mother, the other hand resting casually in his pocket. He smiled, not at her, but at the cameras. And in that moment, Victoria knew. This wasn't about Ashley. This wasn't even about her. This was about control. Marcus would destroy her piece by piece until she had nothing left. But deep inside, beneath the shattered fragments of humiliation, a spark flickered. Rage. Not yet visible, not yet burning, but alive. And rage, Victoria realized, could be more powerful than shame. The ballroom smelled faintly of roses and spilled champagne, the air thick with judgment and whispers. Victoria sat trembling at the edge of the dance floor, her ruined dignity clinging to her like the shattered crystals of her Valentino gown. Her face burned as dozens of eyes stayed fixed on her, savoring every flicker of weakness. Her mother-in-law's cruel words still echoed in her head. Her miscarriages, her antidepressants, her mother's suicide, all of it, weaponized, projected, and applauded. She could feel the laughter bubbling beneath the crowd's polite gasps, the way predators smirk when the prey stumbles. And then she heard it, Ashley's laugh. It was light, airy, practiced, like the sound of someone who knew the cameras adored her. Ashley leaned back in her chair, hair cascading over her bare shoulders, sipping champagne as if she hadn't just stolen Victoria's life, as if she wasn't wearing Victoria's gown, as if she wasn't carrying Marcus's child, or so she claimed. Oh, Victoria's breath hitched. Something inside her snapped. The humiliation that had been simmering all night erupted into raw fury. She pushed herself up, her heels scraping against the marble floor, and grabbed the nearest champagne bottle from a passing waiter's tray. The cold glass felt electric in her hand, alive with purpose. Every eye followed her as she stormed forward. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in until all that existed was Ashley. Ashley in her dress, Ashley with her husband's smirk behind her, Ashley stealing the life Victoria had sacrificed everything to build. "You destroyed my life!" Victoria's voice cracked like thunder across the ballroom. The crowd gasped as one. Cameras jerked upward, phones recording. Ashley's eyes widened, though she made no move to stand. Instead, she tilted her head, lips curving into the faintest smile, as if daring Victoria to continue. The fury roared louder in Victoria's chest. She lifted the bottle high above her head, her grip tightening, ready to bring it down. For one perfect, terrifying second, the entire room seemed suspended in silence. Then Marcus appeared. He moved swiftly, grabbing Victoria's wrist mid-swing. The sudden force made her stumble, and the bottle slipped from her hand. It hit the marble with a deafening crash, shards exploding across the floor, champagne spraying like blood from an open wound. The room erupted in chaos. Guests screamed, chairs scraped, and phones surged upward, capturing every angle of the scene. The once dignified gala now looked like the opening act of a scandalous true crime documentary. Victoria lunged forward again, her voice raw, her body thrashing against Marcus's grip. "I'll kill her! I swear to God, I'll kill her!" Her words rang out, unmistakable, damning. Every syllable was caught on hundreds of recordings, live streamed to thousands who would see her not as a victim, but as the deranged wife unraveling in public. Security guards rushed in, their black suits blending with the shadows as they encircled Victoria. Strong hands gripped her arms, forcing them behind her back, restraining her like a criminal. "Get off me!" she screamed, her face streaked with tears and mascara. She kicked, she twisted, her Valentino gown tearing at the seams as the fabric snagged under the guard's grasp. Marcus stepped back, adjusting his cufflinks with maddening calm, the image of the noble husband barely keeping control of his unstable wife. To the cameras, he was the savior, To Victoria, he was the executioner. Ashley stood, clutching her champagne glass like a delicate trophy. She let out a theatrical gasp, pressing a hand to her chest. "Victoria, please, don't do this," she said, her voice dripping with feigned concern. Victoria snarled, her body straining against the guards. "You bitch! You stole everything from me!" The crowd gasped again, though now the sound was tinged with fascination. They weren't horrified, they were entertained. This was better than the movies, better than the scripted dramas they streamed at home. This was real, raw, live. Phones zoomed in. Hashtags were already being born. Hashtag crazy wifegate. Hashtag sterling scandal. Hashtag Met Ball Gala meltdown. Sarah tried to push through the crowd, her face pale with horror. "Stop it! Don't film this! She needs help, not—" But her words were drowned out by the frenzy, by the insatiable appetite of a society hungry for spectacle. Victoria thrashed harder, the rage consuming her, until her heels snapped against the marble floor. She stumbled, nearly falling, but one of the guards caught her under the arm. To the cameras, it looked like she was collapsing, her body sagging under the weight of madness. Marcus placed a hand on Ashley's shoulder, guiding her backward like a hero protecting the innocent. "It's okay," he said loudly, ensuring every microphone picked up his words. "I won't let her hurt you." The audacity made Victoria scream. "You liar! You set me up! You both—" But her words were cut off as another guard clamped a hand over her wrist and twisted. Pain shot up her arm, forcing her to wince. She scanned the sea of faces, desperate for someone, anyone, to intervene. But no one moved, no one helped. They all just watched, phones raised, as if her pain existed solely for their consumption. And then she saw Diane. Her mother-in-law stood at the edge of the stage, hands folded calmly, her face the picture of composed sorrow. She shook her head just once, as if to say, "I told you, Perham." The humiliation was complete. Victoria sagged in the guard's arms, her energy draining, her fury dissolving into despair. Tears blurred her vision, streaking down her cheeks. The flash of cameras felt like knives against her skin. She could hear the murmurs. "She's insane. She tried to kill her. Did you get that on video?" And above it all, Marcus's voice, calm and measured. "She needs help. Please, let's not judge her too harshly." The hypocrisy made her stomach twist. He was playing the savior, the husband begging for compassion, while he was the architect of her ruin. The guards began to drag her toward the exit, her gown trailing behind her like a funeral shroud. But even as she stumbled forward, humiliation burning like acid in her veins, something shifted inside her. Yes, she had snapped. Yes, she had played right into their hands. But as the cameras captured her tears, her fury, her fall, she realized something. They thought they were destroying her, but in truth, they were documenting their own crimes. Every cruel smirk, every manipulation, every betrayal, it was all on record. And one day she would use it. The ballroom was still ringing with the echoes of glass. The champagne bottle lay shattered like the aftermath of a car crash. Sharp, glittering pieces scattered across marble, sticky bubbles fizzing into nothing. Security held Victoria by the arms, her wrists burning against their grip. Hundreds of phones hovered in the air, little black eyes recording every twitch of her body, every ragged breath. She tried to shake them off. "Let me go. She ruined everything." Her voice cracked, half roar, half sob. She could hear her own scream reverberating through the speakers, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. Ashley Winters, untouched, immaculate, lowered herself to the floor with the precision of an actress blocking a scene. Her red dress pooled dramatically around her legs as she pressed a trembling hand against her stomach. The photographers instinctively shifted focus. One step, two, like wolves circling fresh prey. "The stress," Ashley gasped, loud enough to carry across the ballroom. Her mascara had smudged artfully at the corner of one eye, a tear rolling just slow enough to sparkle under the chandeliers. "My baby!" Gasps rippled. A hedge fund wife clutched her pearls. A board member's jaw dropped. Even the waitstaff, trained to be invisible, froze mid-pour. Victoria's stomach flipped. "Baby?" Ashley fumbled into her rhinestone clutch with trembling fingers. A second later, she produced her phone and shoved it toward the nearest camera lens. The screen glowed with a grainy black and white ultrasound, the unmistakable shape of a fetus floating in the shadows. 3 months pregnant, Ashley announced, her voice breaking perfectly on the word pregnant. She tilted her chin toward Marcus, who had taken a protective step closer, one hand hovering just above her back. With Marcus's child, we were waiting to announce after the divorce. The world detonated. The ballroom erupted in a chorus of gasps, shrieks, and whispered profanities. The wives' circle that had once encircled Victoria like a protective ring dissolved instantly, each woman peeling away like petals curling under fire. Phones surged higher, capturing every angle. "Is she serious?" someone hissed. "Oh my God, look at him. He's not denying it." "Poor Victoria, no, wait, she attacked her." Victoria's pulse thundered in her ears. She shook her head wildly, hair sticking to the sweat at her temples. "This is a stunt. It's fake. She's lying." But even as the words left her mouth, the screens lit up across the room. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram Live. The ultrasound photo spread in seconds, leaping from phone to phone like a virus. A notification pinged on someone's Apple Watch. Hatch's crazy wifegate is trending. Victoria saw it in a sick blur of motion. The hashtag neon bright against the glass screen. The headline wrote itself, "Wife loses it, mistress pregnant with husband's child." And Marcus? He didn't rush to deny it. He didn't correct the record. He didn't look at his wife at all. Instead, he bent down toward Ashley, resting a hand just lightly enough on her shoulder to send the cameras into a frenzy of flashes. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. Victoria's throat constricted. The room spun in dizzying loops, the chandelier above blurring into a smear of gold and crystal. She tried to speak, but her words tangled into a dry rasp. "She's lying," she whispered. But no one listened. The crowd wasn't watching her anymore. They were watching the tableau of Marcus and Ashley, the adulterer turned father-to-be, and the mistress turned mother-in-waiting. It was a headline in real time, a scandal gift-wrapped in blood-red silk. Ashley pressed Marcus's hand closer to her shoulder, angling herself to the cameras as though they were allies. "He was going to tell you, Victoria," she said softly, though her eyes glimmered with triumph. "But I guess I ruined the timing." The microphones of half a dozen phones caught it. Her voice would replay, loop, echo endlessly across the internet within minutes. Victoria lunged forward, but the guards held her tighter. "You pathetic snake! You think anyone believes you?" Her voice cracked so high it bordered on hysteria. That could be anyone's ultrasound. "You pulled it off Google." "Google?" Ashley repeated with mock astonishment. She raised her eyebrows at the crowd. "Is that really the best you've got? Do you hear her?" She made her voice tremble, injecting fragility like poison into every syllable. "This is what I've been living with, the instability, the obsession." The wives who had once comforted Victoria avoided her gaze now, frowning in judgment. One whispered, not softly enough, "Unhinged." Another muttered, "She shouldn't be drinking if she's on meds." Victoria wanted to scream until her lungs bled. Instead, her eyes darted to Marcus. He was her last chance. He could shut this down. He could tell the truth. But Marcus only stood there, jaw tight, expression unreadable. When the silence pressed too heavily, he cleared his throat. "This isn't how I wanted it to come out," he said flatly. The room erupted again. The acknowledgement, small, careful but undeniable, was all anyone needed. Cameras flashed. Guests shouted questions over one another. "Are you leaving, Victoria? When's the due date?" "Marcus, was this planned?" Ashley buried her face in Marcus's chest, feigning embarrassment, while still tilting her phone outward for another camera to capture the ultrasound. Victoria's body went cold. She had fought so hard, endured so much humiliation already. But this was the fatal blow. Not just betrayal, not just exposure, extinction. Her image would forever be the red-faced, screaming wife caught attacking a glowing mother-to-be. A hashtag, a cautionary tale. She thrashed against security again, desperate to break free, to claw the smugness off Ashley's painted face. But the guards only tightened their grip. The crowd parted in waves as more guests arrived, drawn to the spectacle. A TikTok influencer live-streamed directly, whispering to her followers, "Guys, you're not going to believe this. Wall Street scandal live. The wife just snapped and the mistress is pregnant." The numbers ticked upward on her screen. 10,000 viewers, then 50, then 100,000. By the time Victoria caught her own reflection in a mirror across the ballroom, her heart collapsed. She barely recognized the wild-eyed woman glaring back, arms restrained, veins bulging, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Ashley had won. The hashtags were already multiplying like wildfire. Screens glowed everywhere, phones held high, tablets pulled from clutches, even a projector in the corner streaming someone's live feed. The word pregnant blazed in neon letters across comment sections. Hashtag crazy wife gate, hash sterling baby bomb, hashtag Met Gala meltdown. It was no longer a gala, it was a coliseum, and Victoria had been thrown into the pit for the crowd's amusement. "She tried to hit me with a bottle," Ashley's voice carried, pitched just enough to sound fragile but not weak. "And now she wants to deny my child exists." She clutched her belly with one manicured hand and glanced upward as though praying for strength. It was theater, pure and calculated. Gasps and murmurs swirled like smoke. A few sympathetic hands touched Ashley's arm, guiding her to a chaise lounge where she could sit, glowing under the spotlight of manufactured martyrdom. Victoria could only stare, her voice choked out of existence. Her body trembled with so much fury she thought her bones might splinter. She wanted to scream the truth, to drag Ashley down into the dirt where she belonged, but every word would twist against her. "She's unstable," someone whispered. "She's jealous," another replied. No wonder Marcus moved on. Came a third merciless jab. The walls closed in. Victoria's breaths grew shallow. She remembered her therapy notes, the files Diane had paraded across the screen earlier. Miscarriages, antidepressants, family history of suicide. Each revelation now played like a supporting exhibit to Ashley's claim. They had built the perfect cage around her, brick by brick. Ashley's ultrasound, real or not, became the crown jewel. And the crowd? They had chosen their queen. Marcus leaned close to Ashley, murmuring something Victoria couldn't hear. The cameras caught the intimacy of it, his hand brushing her back, her smile widening just enough. It was an image crafted for tabloids, and every lens devoured it. Victoria struggled harder against the guards. "She's lying, she's lying." But her words dissolved into the chaos, drowned beneath the clicks, flashes, and hashtags. Then her phone buzzed in her clutch, still hanging precariously from her wrist. She glanced down, dozens of notifications. Twitter mentions, Instagram tags, her own name trending beside words like unhinged, psychotic, and attack. A TikTok clip already had 500,000 views, her screaming face frozen in a grotesque still shot, mouth open mid-threat. She felt naked, skinned alive. Tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of Ashley. The guards loosened their hold, sensing her sagging fight. The crowd began to disperse into gossip circles, but the damage was permanent. The battle wasn't over. It was already lost. And in that loss, a hollow silence wrapped around Victoria's heart. For the first time, she felt what Marcus wanted her to feel. Small, irrelevant, erased. But deep in that void, something flickered. A dark ember. Not surrender. Not yet. Something uglier. Something hungrier. Ashley might think she'd won tonight. Marcus might think he had buried her. But Victoria's story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The ballroom had transformed into a courtroom without a judge. The jury, draped in sequins and tuxedos, had already delivered its verdict. Victoria Sterling, guilty of madness, jealousy, irrelevance. She felt the gavel slam against her chest with every whisper. She's done, she's over. Poor Marcus. Her knees buckled. The guards released her at last, perhaps realizing she posed no danger anymore. She stumbled forward, clutching the table nearest her for balance. The stem of a champagne flute snapped under her grip, slicing her palm. She didn't flinch. The sting grounded her, tethered her to reality while the world tried to swallow her whole. Ashley, still perched like a fragile saint, let her voice rise once more. "I never wanted it this way. I wanted peace for the baby's sake. The room sighed with sympathy. Phones captured her tearful expression from every angle. It would be the meme of the night. Victoria turned toward Marcus, her husband, her betrayer. He met her gaze briefly, then looked away. It was worse than hatred. It was indifference, a man already living in a future where she no longer existed. A sound escaped her throat, part laugh, part sob. "You're all blind," she rasped. Her voice was hoarse, stripped raw by shouting and humiliation. "You're applauding a fraud, a liar, a parasite." Her words bounced off disbelieving stares. A guest chuckled nervously as though she were performing for them now. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another headline. Another nail in the coffin. Victoria Sterling loses it at Met Gala after party. Billionaire's wife unhinged after mistress pregnancy reveal. Crazy wife gate. Would you believe her? The captions burned hotter than the cut on her hand. She could almost hear Marcus narrating the story himself, spinning it for the press, charming his investors with practiced Dora. She struggled for years, but I did my best. When Ashley and I found love, it wasn't about betrayal. It was about survival. For the baby. Her chest convulsed with the force of her rage. She wanted to destroy everything in sight, to tear the chandelier from the ceiling, to drag Ashley by her perfect hair, and force the crowd to look at the truth. But the truth no longer mattered. Perception had already devoured it. Victoria's eyes glazed. Her breath came shallow. For a terrible second, she thought she might collapse completely, let them cart her away like a broken doll. And then, out of the noise, out of the shame, came a voice. "Enough!" It cut through the chaos like a blade. Heads turned, the crowd hushed. James Rothwell. He moved through the crowd like he owned it, which in a way he did. The space seemed to part for him, bodies shifting to give him a clear path as though some primal recognition demanded it. His height, his poise, his billionaire certainty. He was light cutting through fog, and then he was there, kneeling beside her. His hand reached down, warm and steady, clasping hers. "Victoria," he said, softly enough that only she heard. His voice carried that blend of familiarity and strength that unlocked something in her chest she thought long dead. "I've got you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to recoil, to refuse this sudden lifeline, but her body betrayed her, collapsing forward into his arms. She breathed in the faint scent of his cologne, something sharp and expensive. And for the first time that night, she didn't feel like she was falling. James straightened, pulling her with him, and then raised his voice for the crowd. "This is wrong," he declared, "all of it." The room hushed. Even the phones stilled, waiting for this new performance. James pulled his phone from his pocket and held it high. "I have proof Marcus has been planning this humiliation for months. Emails, bank transfers, blackmail payments, every move designed to destroy her." A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads turned, expressions shifting. Skepticism, curiosity. A few sparks of sympathy. Victoria's knees nearly buckled again, but James steadied her. She looked up at him, searching his face for deceit, for cruelty, for the familiar shadow of betrayal. But all she saw was conviction. His jaw was set, his eyes flashing with the intensity of someone who had chosen a side. My side, she thought, disbelieving. Her heart, which had been beating in frantic, broken stutters, began to find a rhythm again. It hurt, that rhythm, like blood rushing into a limb that had gone numb. But it was life. It was hope. The crowd's mood shifted, barely, but she felt it. A recalibration. Where she had stood alone against Ashley's perfect lie, she now had someone at her side. Not just anyone, but James Rothwell, the kind of man people listened to. Victoria's mind screamed at her not to trust it. Don't fall for it. Don't be so desperate you cling to the first hand that reaches out. But her heart betrayed her again. She leaned against James, trembling, whispering so only he could hear. They'll believe you. He glanced down, his eyes softening. They'll believe us. For a moment, the entire world receded. The noise, the flashing lights, Ashley's sanctimonious smirk, none of it mattered. She had an ally, someone who saw her not as the villain, but as the victim. And it was almost too much. The tears she had held back for so long welled up, spilling hot and unrelenting down her cheeks. She clutched at James's arm, her voice breaking. Thank you. It was more than gratitude. It was surrender, a raw outpouring of relief. James turned to the crowd, his voice rising. I'll testify. I'll stand in her divorce proceedings and make sure the truth is heard. This woman isn't unstable. She isn't violent. She's been betrayed by her husband, by her so-called friends, by all of you who rushed to believe a lie. The words struck like a bell, reverberating through the ballroom. Victoria's pulse soared. The shame, the despair that had suffocated her for the past hour loosened its chokehold. For the first time she could breathe. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't alone. For the first time she had hope. Marcus's mask faltered. His smug half-smile collapsed into something harder, meaner, as he lunged toward James with outstretched hands. That's confidential. You can't— Confidential, James barked back, his voice rich with conviction. Tell that to your wife, your real wife, whom you've been gaslighting and bleeding drunk. The words landed like thunder, booming in Victoria's chest. Her throat constricted, tears each stinging, gaslighting. Finally, someone else naming what she had endured. For months, she'd twisted herself into knots, wondering if she was paranoid, too fragile, too broken. Marcus had made her question every thought, every instinct, until she barely trusted her own reflection. Now the truth was laid bare in front of everyone. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't unhinged. She had been betrayed. The shift inside her was almost violent in its intensity. The despair that had threatened to pull her under only minutes ago receded, replaced by a trembling spark of fury and relief intermingled. Her breath came ragged but steadier. She clutched James's sleeve like it was the last tether to herself. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for spectacle, but their whispers no longer carried the same gleeful venom. Confusion spread, uncertainty gnawed at their narrative. Had they chosen the wrong villain? Was the crazy wife actually the victim? Victoria's mind raced. If this is real, if he truly has proof, then I'm not alone. I can fight. I can still fight. Marcus hissed something under his breath, his face twisting as he realized the tide was slipping from his control. Ashley, too, faltered in her performance, her hands slipping from her stomach as her eyes darted nervously at the glowing screen in James's hand. The ultrasound photo suddenly seemed fragile, a prop that might shatter under the weight of evidence. Victoria straightened a fraction, her body no longer curling inward in shame, but leaning forward toward possibility. James didn't just hold a phone, he held the door out of the cage Marcus had built for her. The city lights flickered like distant stars as the limousine sped through the streets, the low hum of the engine a stark contrast to the storm inside Victoria's chest. Her heart, still reeling from the chaos of the gala, was beginning to settle in the wake of James Rothwell's intervention. She sat beside him now, her back pressed against the soft leather of the limo's interior, the weight of his presence both a comfort and a strange source of confusion. She had allowed herself to believe him, believe in him. James had done what no one else had. He had looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he hadn't seen the crazy wife or the unstable woman. He had seen her pain, her devastation, and in his eyes, she had found something like a lifeline. As the limo glided through the nighttime streets, the sound of her own breathing was oddly loud in the silence between them. She glanced at James, his jaw set, his eyes locked on the road, but there was something behind that calm mask. He hadn't once mentioned Marcus or Ashley or anything about the night's public humiliation, but Victoria could see it in his eyes. He had done the impossible. He had saved her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with the weight of emotions she wasn't quite sure how to name. James's lips softened, his hand reaching out to take hers in his. No need to thank me, he said quietly. You've been through enough. It was the right thing to do. The comfort of his touch, his calm demeanor, it was almost too much. Her throat tightened, and she pressed her hand against her eyes, wiping away the remnants of tears she hadn't even realized were still falling. She began, but her voice faltered. I thought I was losing everything. I don't know how to thank you for— Shh. He cut her off gently, squeezing her hand. No need to say anything more. You've been through hell, and now we're going to make sure it doesn't define you. I'll testify. I'll be there for you in the divorce." His words were a balm, each syllable soothing the raw places in her heart. She leaned her head back against the window, her body finally starting to relax, and for a brief moment, she let herself believe that everything would be okay. Marcus would pay for what he had done. Ashley would be exposed for the fraud she was. Victoria would rise from the ashes, stronger than ever. James's voice broke through her thoughts. "You're going to be okay. I won't let them destroy you." The sincerity in his tone was enough to almost make her believe it. She nodded, squeezing his hand, her chest tight with something she couldn't quite name. Hope, relief, and then buzz. The sound of a text message notification sliced through the moment like a knife. Victoria's breath hitched, a twinge of unease prickling up her spine. James's phone buzzed again, this time vibrating softly on the seat between them. Victoria glanced over. She didn't mean to, but her eyes caught the screen just as he picked up the phone. She couldn't help it. The reflection in the mirror was enough to see the text preview. "Wire transferred, good performance." The words hit her like ice water. Her heart stuttered, but she forced her gaze to remain steady, not wanting James to see the sudden shift in her face. Her thoughts raced as she replayed the words in her head. Wire transferred? The message was from Marcus, of course. Victoria's pulse quickened, but she refused to react. She turned her head slightly, pretending to look out the window as she swallowed down the panic rising in her throat. She had seen what she had seen. James didn't notice. He was still looking at his phone, scrolling quickly through the text. "She bought it completely," he typed, his fingers moving with methodical speed. "Recording everything." The text was so casual, so matter-of-fact, and in that moment, Victoria's stomach dropped out from beneath her. She felt sick, nauseous, dizzy, as the cold reality of what was happening hit her all at once. No, this can't be happening. It wasn't possible. She had to be mistaken. She had to be seeing things, misreading the situation. But no, her mind refused to lie to her anymore. Victoria felt the sudden surge of anger in her chest, the betrayal too raw to contain. She closed her eyes, trying to collect herself. She couldn't break down now, not in front of him. Not in front of the man who had promised to help her, to stand by her side. The man who was now texting Marcus, orchestrating everything from the shadows. The tears threatened to spill again, but she swallowed them back. "How could I have been so stupid?" she thought bitterly. "How could I have believed this was real?" She had thought she was finally getting control, finally finding her way out of the darkness. James had been her savior, her protector. But he wasn't her savior. He was a puppet, just like Marcus. Just another man playing her. Victoria clenched her fists so tightly, her nails bit into her palms. She didn't want to believe it. She wanted to scream, to shout at James, to demand the truth. But something held her back, a voice in her mind telling her to wait, to watch. She had no idea how long she sat there, staring out of the window, her body rigid with tension. It felt like an eternity. Every second, the weight of his betrayal settled deeper into her bones. She wanted to believe she had misunderstood, that there was some explanation. But she knew deep down he had planned it all, from the very beginning. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and controlled, almost too calm. "You're working with him, aren't you?" James froze, his fingers pausing mid-text. He turned to her, his eyes wide with feigned surprise. "What do you mean?" Victoria met his gaze, every inch of her shaking. She saw through him now. He was nothing more than a puppet, a man who had played the long con, just like Marcus. "You've been recording everything, haven't you?" she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of her own realization. "You've been setting me up from the start." James didn't answer. He simply lowered his gaze, his lips tightening into a thin line. The silence was deafening. And in that silence, Victoria knew her salvation had always been a lie. The limousine rolled to a stop in front of the tall glass building, its sleek exterior glowing under the harsh streetlights. Victoria barely noticed the setting, her mind still reeling from the realization that James had been playing her all along, was a battlefield. Each thought felt like a bullet, sharp and painful, but there was no escaping it. She had been a pawn in a game she didn't even know existed, and now she was sinking deeper into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The drive had been silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional distant buzz of James's phone. She had refused to speak. Every time she tried, her throat constricted as though 1,000 hands were choking the words from her lips. They had arrived at the hotel, a place she had once considered her sanctuary, a haven from the chaos of Marcus's world. But now, even the familiar luxury felt suffocating. The lights, the chatter, the laughter, it all seemed distant, a world she was no longer part of. She had been cast out, her life torn apart in a way she never thought possible. As the doors opened, James helped her out of the limo, his arm around her, the once comforting touch now a reminder of how deeply she had been deceived. She tried to stand tall, to regain some semblance of dignity, but her knees shook beneath her. Every step felt like a betrayal of everything she had ever known. Inside, the scene was more surreal than anything she had experienced that night. The gala, which had once been a glittering escape, was now a grotesque circus. A few familiar faces in the crowd looked at her with pity, while others barely glanced in her direction, already consumed by the latest scandal. But what hit her hardest were the whispers, low but cutting through the air, wrapping around her like a vice. As she moved through the throngs of guests, her gaze fell on Marcus. His icy blue eyes met hers across the room, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward in something like triumph. The man who had once vowed to love her had broken her in a way she couldn't even begin to process. And now, standing in front of all these people, he was about to destroy what was left of her. "Victoria!" Marcus's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She froze, her blood running cold at the sound. He was holding the microphone, his voice clear, projecting across the room. The crowd fell silent, anticipating whatever was coming next. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his tone dripping with false concern, "I regret to inform you that my wife, Victoria Sterling, has been struggling with severe mental health issues for quite some time now." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the final blow. She's been a danger to herself, and for her own safety, as well as the safety of others, I've had no choice but to have her committed for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and she barely caught herself on the nearest table. The room swirled around her, the glittering chandeliers now mocking her, casting their cold light on the shattered remnants of her life. For a moment, she felt like an animal in a trap, helpless, exposed, and desperate. This wasn't just public humiliation. This was the stripping away of everything she had built. Her dignity, her reputation, her sanity. Everything was being torn down by the one person who knew her best, and worst of all, was the one person who had promised to love her forever. And just as the weight of Marcus's words sank deeper into her chest, the doors to the ballroom opened. A pair of uniformed officers entered the room, their presence like a storm. Victoria's heart stopped, and she turned her gaze to the officers, dread surging through her veins. The taller of the two officers, a man in his late 40s with a lined face and weary eyes, approached her with a set of papers in hand. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we have orders to take you in for an involuntary psychiatric hold. We have the necessary paperwork right here." Victoria's world tilted. She stumbled back, but James was there, his arm around her, guiding her like a puppet. The officers were already moving toward her, and there was nowhere to run. The crowd was watching, waiting. How had it come to this? She had never imagined her life could unravel so quickly, so completely. Marcus had orchestrated everything, feeding the narrative, playing the perfect villain, and now he was about to have her carted off like a lunatic. One of the officers unfolded the papers, handing them to James. "It's all in order," the officer said. "She's been signed in for psychiatric evaluation by her therapist, her husband, and her mother-in-law." Victoria's eyes darted to Diane, who stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed over her chest, a cold, disinterested expression on her face. Her mother-in-law, the woman who had never liked her, had sealed her fate. Diane's gaze met hers, and for a split second, Victoria thought she saw something. Regret, maybe? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. There was no sympathy in Diane's eyes, only cold calculation. The officers moved closer, and Victoria's breath came in shallow gasps. This can't be real. It can't. But the officer's firm hands on her arms told her everything she needed to know. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This isn't right. You can't." But the officers didn't stop. They just continued, and the cold reality of her situation settled deeper into her bones. As they guided her out of the room, she caught sight of Ashley standing near the stage, microphone in hand. Some say, in hand. Her face painted with the expression of a saintly martyr. Her lips parted in a mock sympathy that made Victoria's stomach churn. "I'll pray for her recovery," Ashley said, her voice too soft, too deliberate. "Mental illness is so tragic." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding solemnly, others taking out their phones to capture the moment, eager to share the latest chapter of the Sterling saga. Victoria's legs buckled again, and she had to be lifted by the officers, her body moving in a daze, almost mechanically. But she kept her head high, refusing to break, even as the humiliation stung sharper than any physical wound. The doors to the ballroom slammed shut behind her, and for a fleeting second, the world was quiet. In that silence, she realized this wasn't just the end of her marriage. This was the end of her. The world had already decided who she was, and there was no one left to defend her. The officers led her down the hallway, the sound of her heels echoing through the empty space. The crowd's whispers were still ringing in her ears, but she was beyond hearing them now. She had already begun to disappear. And in that moment, she understood this was Marcus's final victory. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, cold and merciless. Victoria sat on the hard plastic bench, the satin folds of her ruined $50,000 Valentino gown pooling around her feet like the carcass of a dead bird. She felt every pair of eyes on her, officers behind desks, clerks tapping at computers, a drunk sleeping it off 2 seats down. They all saw the same thing. A fallen woman in a shredded ball gown, mascara streaks marking her face like war paint. When the officer asked for her ID and a card for processing fees, Victoria fumbled through her clutch. Relief flickered as she handed over her black Amex, her last remaining lifeline. But the relief lasted only seconds. "Decline," the officer said flatly. She blinked. "Run it again." He did. Same response. The word "decline" flashed in angry red letters on the screen. One by one, she tried every card she had, all rejected, frozen, cut off. A cold sweat spread across her back. Marcus hadn't just humiliated her, he had gutted her existence. She excused herself, hands shaking as she dialed her lawyer's number. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Nothing. On the third attempt, she switched to her private cell, the one Marcus didn't know about, praying for a miracle. Finally, the line clicked. Then laughter filled the background. Music. Clinking glasses. "Sorry, I can't take this right now," her lawyer said quickly, before cutting the line. Victoria's chest tightened. He was still at the gala, with Marcus. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. She turned it on the station's TV mounted high in the corner, desperate for distraction. But the screen stole what little strength she had left. Her sister's face filled the broadcast, poised, rehearsed, sympathetic for the cameras. "Victoria has always been unstable," she told the reporter. "We tried to get her help for years. Maybe this is finally what she needs." The reporter nodded solemnly. Breaking news scrolled beneath. Had crazy wife, gate enters, day 2. Victoria's stomach twisted violently. Even her own blood had turned. By the time she was released hours later, dawn was breaking, gray lights spilling across the city like ash. She clutched her gown tighter around her shoulders, shivering despite the humid air. Her heels clicked hollowly as she walked to her apartment building, her one safe place left. But when she slid her key into the lock, it didn't turn. She tried again, and again. Panic rose like bile in her throat. The night guard looked at her apologetically from behind the desk. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm sorry. Mr. Sterling had the locks changed this morning. You're no longer on the lease." Her lips parted, but no words came. She pressed her palm against the cold glass of the lobby door, staring at the lobby that used to be hers. The orchids on the table, the marble floor, the life she had built. All gone. Victoria Sterling, once the queen of her world, now stood barefoot on the New York sidewalk, her only possession, the shredded gown clinging to her body like a cruel joke. For the first time, she truly felt it. She had nothing. Absolutely nothing. The psychiatric facility smelled of antiseptic and resignation. Pale green walls stretched down endless hallways, broken by identical metal doors, each with its own tiny square of reinforced glass. Victoria sat on the edge of her bed, the thin hospital gown hanging loose around her frame. Her ruined $50,000 gown folded neatly on the chair beside her like a relic of a fallen queen. She had been here less than 12 hours, yet the world outside felt a lifetime away. The gala, the flashing cameras, Ashley's smug face, Marcus's triumphant smirk, all of it had dissolved into a surreal haze. The humiliation had been public, devastating, final. Or so Marcus believed. Footsteps clicked against the linoleum. A nurse entered, holding a clipboard. "You have a visitor?" Victoria looked up, wary. No one visited a woman declared unfit within hours of her confinement. "Who?" The nurse's expression was unreadable. "She says her name is Monica Reeves. You'll want to see her." Minutes later, Victoria found herself escorted into a small interview room. A rectangular table sat between two chairs, a humming security camera in the corner. A woman in her early 40s sat waiting, dressed not in hospital whites but in a sharp navy pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Victoria Sterling," the woman said with a faint smile. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you in person." Victoria stiffened. "Do I know you?" The woman leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Not yet. My name is Monica Reeves, Securities and Exchange Commission." The words cracked through the fog in Victoria's brain like lightning. She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "SEC? Why would the SEC?" Monica cut her off with a knowing look. "Because Marcus Sterling has been playing a very dangerous game on Wall Street. Insider trading, wire fraud, falsifying documents. And you, Mrs. Sterling, are my star informant." Victoria's heart jolted. Her mask slipped, the exhaustion in her eyes giving way to a flicker of relief. You're not here to evaluate me?" Monica chuckled softly. "Evaluate you? Honey, you've been doing the best acting job I've ever seen. That meltdown at the gala? Pure performance. The champagne bottle, the so-called acid attack, the screaming. Every second captured exactly the way we needed it to be." Victoria's lips parted, the tension in her shoulders easing as the truth shimmered in the air between them. For the first time in months, she could breathe without the weight of Marcus's narrative crushing her chest. "So it worked," she whispered. Monica nodded. "Perfectly. The humiliation, the leaks, even your mother-in-law's little stunt with your medical records. It's all evidence now. Marcus thought he was destroying you. In reality, he was incriminating himself on a dozen counts." Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, replaying the horrors of the past months. The therapy sessions Marcus had hacked and broadcast, they had been scripted with an FBI psychologist carefully crafted to bait him. The financial records he thought he had stolen, decoys designed to expose his methods. The dress, her gown, was laced with micro-recording devices sewn into the crystal beading, capturing hours of audio. Every humiliation had been part of the plan. Her eyes open, sharp and clear now. "And Ashley?" Monica smirked. "The influencer? Her pregnancy announcement was fake. We've already traced the ultrasound image, lifted from a clinic database in Miami. She's facing charges of fraud and extortion. She'll crumble the second we put her under lights." Victoria let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half rage. Marcus thought he was staging my annihilation, but I was staging his. Monica's gaze softened just slightly. "Exactly. You endured hell for 6 months so we could build an airtight case. You fed us documents, recorded conversations, sacrificed your reputation. And now we're ready to bring it all down. The raids are scheduled. By the time your 72 hours here are up, Marcus Sterling will be in federal custody." The words tasted like victory, even if premature. Still, a flicker of doubt lingered in Victoria's chest. "But the world believes I'm insane. They filmed everything. They think I tried to kill Ashley. That I'm a pill-popping lunatic." Monica leaned closer, her eyes locking with Victoria's. That's exactly why it worked. Marcus lowered his guard because he thought he'd won. He thought you were too broken to fight back. But the difference is when we flip the switch, we'll have hard evidence. Proof trumps rumor every single time. Victoria's throat tightened, but this time not from despair. For the first time, her tears weren't of humiliation, but of vindication. She whispered almost to herself, "He never saw me coming." Monica reached across the table, sliding over a slim black folder. Inside were photographs, transcripts, bank records, everything Victoria had risked her sanity to collect. The world is going to see the truth, Victoria. And when they do, you won't just survive this, you'll own it. Victoria's fingers lingered on the folder, the weight of it both terrifying and exhilarating. Her mind flashed to the broken woman in the ballroom, dragged out like a criminal. That version of her was gone now. She straightened her shoulders, her reflection in the polished table no longer a victim, but a strategist, a survivor. "Then let's finish it," she said. And for the first time, Victoria Sterling smiled. Victoria sat at the narrow desk in her psychiatric wardroom. The folder Monica had left before her still unopened. The overhead light buzzed faintly, a reminder that she wasn't free, not yet, but she wasn't broken anymore either. Her fingers traced the edge of the folder. Inside lay proof that every humiliation, every tear, every gasp of shock in the ballroom had been nothing more than the scaffolding of a trap. She inhaled, steadying herself. It was time to remember what the world did not know. The therapy sessions. Marcus had gloated when those clips went viral. The ones showing Victoria breaking down in her therapist's office, sobbing about worthlessness, paranoia, fears of abandonment. He thought he'd stolen them from her password-protected cloud account, broadcasting her weakness to prove she was unstable. The media lapped it up, dissecting every shudder, every muttered word. But what Marcus never suspected, those sessions were fictions. The therapist was not a therapist at all, but Dr. Daniel Cross, a clinical psychologist embedded with the FBI, trained in forensic deception. Every session had been scripted like a scene from theater, Victoria delivering her lines with the precision of an actress. She had practiced her breakdowns in the mirror, perfected the shake in her voice, even rehearsed the moments of silence where the doctor would nod solemnly, jotting notes designed to bait Marcus into stealing them. The moment Marcus leaked them, Monica's team had what they needed: proof of cyber intrusion, unauthorized medical record theft, and public dissemination of falsified material. A perfect chain of evidence. Victoria smiled grimly at the memory. She had played the fragile wife so well that even she had almost believed it. The medical records came next. She remembered the chill of fear the first time her phone buzzed with the news. Marcus's legal team had discovered psychiatric diagnoses in her hospital files: borderline personality disorder, narcotic dependency, even staged notes about delusions and hallucinations. She had walked through the gala with those whispers trailing her like smoke. She's sick, she's on pills, she's dangerous. But the truth? Those records had been planted. Working with Monica's team, Victoria had seeded false entries into a test database flagged with tracer code. When Marcus's hired hacker broke in, the code attached itself like invisible ink, recording every keystroke, every download. The false diagnoses weren't just bait, they were a glowing breadcrumb trail proving Marcus's complicity. He thought he had her cornered. In reality, she had handed him the rope he would hang himself with. And then, perhaps the cruelest twist of all, the acid attack. The ballroom silence after the champagne glass shattered had been deafening. Victoria's hand had trembled as she raised the bottle, the liquid arcing through the air. Gasps, screams, Ashley's shriek as the substance splashed across her silk dress. Marcus had leapt into action, the gallant savior grabbing Ashley, shielding her from his hysterical wife. Cameras had captured it from every angle. Marcus the hero, Victoria the monster. But Victoria had known the truth. The bottle had never contained acid. It wasn't even champagne. The liquid inside was nothing more than diluted cleaning solution, non-toxic, harmless, incapable of damaging fabric, let alone skin. She had insisted on it. Monica's team had made sure of it. She needed Marcus to feel triumphant. needed him to think he had crushed her so thoroughly that he dropped his guard, crowed too loudly, and left himself exposed. And he had. The ballroom footage now sat in federal custody, not as evidence of her breakdown, but of his manipulation, his stage-managed attempt to annihilate her reputation. Victoria pressed her palms flat against the desk, feeling her pulse quicken as the pieces locked into place. Marcus believed he had destroyed her, but everything, the sessions, the files, the gala, had been carefully orchestrated moves on a chessboard only she and Monica could see. For months, she had walked the tightrope of despair, knowing every whispered insult, every sympathetic headline about her illness. Every smug look from Ashley was necessary. Painful, yes, but necessary, because every time Marcus laughed, every time he gloated, he left fingerprints on the very crimes he believed invisible. The world thought she had been stripped bare. In truth, she had been weaving her net. The door to her room clicked. Monica stepped inside, carrying a manila envelope this time. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, noting the untouched bed. Victoria gave a small, sardonic laugh. "I was remembering the show we've been staging." Monica arched a brow. "And?" Victoria opened the folder, sliding out a still image of herself in the therapy chair, head in hands. "I thought I was good, but God, I almost convinced myself." Monica smiled, the rare warmth of pride crossing her features. "That's why it worked. Marcus only believes in what he sees. And you gave him exactly what he wanted to see. A fragile wife, cracking under pressure." Victoria looked down at the photograph again, at the woman who appeared so broken. "She doesn't exist anymore." "No," Monica agreed. She set the envelope on the desk. "And when this is over, neither will Marcus." Victoria's throat tightened, not with despair this time, but anticipation. The revelation wasn't just that she had survived. It was that she had been the architect of her own survival all along. Her ruin had been an illusion, her madness a mask. The truth? It was sharper, stronger, and far more dangerous. And soon the world would see it. The psychiatric ward clock ticked past midnight, its hands slicing through the silence with cruel precision. Victoria stood before the mirror, bolted to the wall, her ruined Valentino gown still draped around her like a ghost of humiliation. The $50,000 dress, ripped, wine-stained, mocked by social media, looked like a symbol of her downfall. But it was more than a dress. It was a weapon. Monica Reeves laid out the photographs on the desk between them, microscopic images of glittering Swarovski crystals. But hidden inside the facets were recording chips, the kind used in military surveillance. They had captured every word spoken within 20 feet of her at the gala. Marcus's sneers, Ashley's mocking laughter, Diane's condescending prayers, even the frantic whispers of lawyers and bankers huddled near the bar. All of it, hours of raw, unfiltered conspiracy, sat neatly cataloged on hard drives now in federal custody. Victoria touched the fabric at her hip, remembering how self-conscious she'd been when the stylist insisted she sparkle under the chandelier lights. She almost laughed at the irony. "They thought they were watching me unravel," she said softly. "But I was watching them." Monica gave a curt nod. "The irony is delicious, isn't it?" The ultrasound, Ashley's trembling performance still echoed in Victoria's ears. The stress, my baby. The theatrics that sent the crowd gasping, phones flashing, hashtags erupting across the internet. But Monica had done her homework. The ultrasound Ashley waved at the cameras was a stock image lifted from a medical supply catalog, purchased for a few $100s. For weeks, Ashley had been feeding different versions of the story to competing tabloids, dangling exclusives for cash. The pregnancy had never existed. Now, journalists who had paid for her lies were turning, furious at being conned. Monica's team had bank statements, email negotiations, even a staged photo shoot Ashley had planned for next month. Mommy to be at the beach. Victoria's lips curled into something almost like a smile. So while I was losing everything, she was selling headlines. Which means, Monica replied, sliding another folder toward her, when this breaks, the public turns on her first. No sympathy left, no credibility. She becomes radioactive. James Rothwell. The memory of his arms around her in the ballroom still lingered, the warmth of his voice declaring, "I have proof." For a fleeting moment, Victoria had believed salvation was real, that someone cared enough to stand against Marcus. And then, the limo, the buzzing phone, Marcus's text, the betrayal carved into her like a blade. But Monica leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp. You think we'd really let you walk into that alone? James was with us the entire time. Every word in that limo was rehearsed. Victoria froze, her pulse spiking. Rehearsed? Marcus needed to believe you were abandoned, hopeless, that even your rescuer was for sale. But the recording devices in his phone, federal issue, captured Marcus's confirmation of the wire transfer. Solid gold evidence. The breath Victoria had been holding escaped in a sharp rush. All those tears, the hollow pit of betrayal, the ache of thinking she was truly alone, it had all been part of the act. Her despair had been real. But James's betrayal had been a mask. The cascade came together. Every cruel word Marcus had hissed in her ear when cameras weren't rolling. Every mocking toast Ashley made when she thought the wives' circle was out of earshot. Every false headline Diane paid reporters to plant. The dress had captured them. The hacked files traced Marcus's crimes. The staged therapy sessions proved intrusion. The ultrasound exposed fraud. It wasn't a handful of evidence. It was an avalanche. Victoria stared at the wall, seeing not peeling paint, but the images of their smug faces at the gala, the crowd that had cheered her destruction. They didn't know it yet, but they had written their own obituaries in whispered fragments and drunken boasts. Monica gathered the folders into a neat stack. Tomorrow the cascade begins. Leaks, subpoenas, indictments. Once it starts, Marcus won't be able to plug the holes fast enough. Every humiliation you endured, now it turns back on them. Victoria's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk until her knuckles whitened. For months she had played the pawn, but in this moment she felt the shift, the weight of the queen sliding across the board. They stripped me of everything, she murmured. My marriage, my reputation, my name, and I let them because it had to look real. But now, she never needed Marcus's trust fund nor Diane's approval. Long before the gala, Victoria had been quietly building a tech empire under the shell company, her name hidden, her power disguised. Every late-night therapy session Marcus thought was weakness was in fact strategy, time she spent funneling $50 million offshore, far beyond his reach. The crazy wife performance wasn't humiliation, it was camouflage. Marcus never looked closely when he believed he'd already won. And the psychiatric hold, that was her masterpiece. While paparazzi broadcast her downfall and social media buried her under hashtags, she had the perfect alibi, untouchable, locked away, while the FBI raids were already in motion. For the first time in years, Victoria smiled. Marcus thought he had destroyed her. In truth, he had built her shield. When the news broke, the world wouldn't see a fallen socialite. They would see the woman who engineered the perfect sting. Her reflection in the mirror straightened, shoulders squaring, eyes sharp with a fire she hadn't seen in months. Now I'm going to strip them of everything. The evidence cascade had begun. The hum of the psychiatric facility was steady, sterile, nurses gliding in and out with clipboards, the faint beep of machines down the corridor. To everyone there, Victoria Sterling was just another patient recovering from a public breakdown. To Victoria, it was the safest stage in New York. She sat at the small vanity in her room, carefully applying lipstick with the steady hand of a woman who had already seen the future. The compact mirror caught the fluorescent light and framed her face not as a patient, but as a woman reborn. Her phone buzzed on the table. She didn't need to check. The timing was perfect. The news alerts had started exploding. Breaking FBI raids meant Gala after party. Helicopters circled the Manhattan skyline. Armored vans screeched to a stop outside the glittering museum, where hours earlier, Marcus Sterling had paraded his mistress and humiliated his wife. Federal agents in jackets swarmed the marble steps, their radios crackling. Guests who had been sipping champagne were now held in corners, phones confiscated, security cameras dismantled. The first arrest was Marcus. Cameras caught it live, his $1,000 cufflinks glinting as agents yanked his wrist behind his back, reading charges of insider trading, wire fraud, and hacking medical records. He shouted at the cameras, insisting he was innocent, that it was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence cascade had already begun. Victoria dabbed her lip with tissue, ensuring the color was flawless. The second arrest came within minutes. Ashley Winters, the Instagram darling, still dressed in her stolen gown, tried to melt into the crowd. But agents cornered her with printouts of bank transfers and tabloid contracts. The ultrasound scam was only the beginning. She had a list of married men, each blackmailed, each paying her silence. The influencer sobbed on the museum steps, mascara running, begging photographers not to film her. They filmed anyway. The third was Diane Sterling, the matriarch who had once sneered into microphones about mental health being a tragic weakness, now screamed as agents unfolded stacks of financial records. Decades of tax evasion, offshore accounts hidden in Caribbean shell companies. She clawed at her pearls as if they might save her. They didn't. Victoria smoothed her hair in the mirror, her reflection serene. Across Manhattan, a different podium was being prepared. James Rothwell adjusted his tie beneath the glare of dozens of cameras. The press conference had been announced only minutes earlier, but every network was live, every journalist leaning forward, pens poised. The man who had once been dismissed as Victoria's old flame now commanded the room. "I stand before you tonight," James began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of revelation, "to correct the narrative you've been fed." What the world saw at the Met Gala was not a woman unraveling. It was the dismantling of a criminal empire, piece by piece, in plain sight. The room erupted in murmurs, cameras flashing. James held up a folder, thick with documents. "Every dollar Marcus Sterling attempted to bribe me with, traced. Every false contract, documented. Every cruel betrayal, recorded. Because Victoria Sterling and I played the long game." A reporter shouted, "Are you saying this was all staged?" James smiled faintly. "Not staged, engineered." Victoria endured humiliation because she knew every second was evidence. She didn't fall apart. She built a case so airtight even the Sterling dynasty couldn't buy their way out. Gasps, more flashes. The story was rewriting itself in real time. "And tonight," James continued, "I can announce that our joint venture, Aurora Technologies, has officially gone public. Valuation, $2 billion. Ownership, 70% Victoria Sterling." The room exploded. Questions shouted over one another. How long has this been planned? How much did she know? Was she complicit in her husband's crimes? James raised a hand, silencing them. Victoria needed the world to believe she was powerless. That is how she stayed invisible long enough to expose Marcus, Ashley, and Diane. She sacrificed her reputation to reveal the truth. Now the truth is undeniable. The live feeds cut between James's conference and the arrests unfolding outside the Met. Screens across the country flickered with the downfall of elites once thought untouchable. Back in the psychiatric facility, Victoria leaned back in her chair, the faint hum of applause from James's broadcast drifting through the television in her room. She didn't need the spotlight. Not yet. She had been painted as the crazy wife, the fragile beauty, the broken trophy. Now the world was learning she had been the architect all along. Her reflection stared back at her, calm, deliberate, almost regal. The lipstick, perfect. The gown ruined but repurposed. She was no longer a Sterling wife. She was Victoria Sterling, empire builder, survivor, and queen of her own narrative. Her phone buzzed again. Another alert. Breaking. Marcus Sterling aged 25 years. Ashley Winters, charged with fraud. Diane Sterling, facing federal indictment. Victoria smiled. The sting had unveiled itself perfectly. Victoria walks out of the psychiatric facility in a simple white suit. Reporters swarm. She takes the mic. "Every woman called crazy by a man trying to silence her deserves justice. I documented everything. Not just for me, for all of us who've been gaslit, humiliated, and discarded." Victoria in her new penthouse, dressed in silk pajamas, watching Netflix. On screen, based on true events. The Victoria Sterling story, coming this fall. She raises her champagne to the camera. "They wanted a crazy ex-wife story. I gave them a criminal conspiracy thriller. The difference? I controlled the narrative." Her phone shows the Variety headline, Victoria Sterling's Netflix deal worth $30 million, highest paid true crime story ever. Below that, Marcus Sterling sentenced to 25 years. Ashley Winters deported to face fraud charges. Diane Sterling dies of heart attack during arrest. Victoria deletes Marcus's contact, then Ashley's, then everyone from that world. 2 months later, Victoria walking into a boardroom full of female executives. The placard reads, Sterling Survivors Foundation, supporting women through financial abuse. She never looks back.